So people are usually surprised when I tell them that the investments that got me to financial freedom today were ones that I made when my salary was $105,000 a year or less. But that's the amazing thing about compound interest. Wealth is just the gap between what we earn and what we spend compounded over time. It's all the little things that we can't see, which is why I think finances can be so hard sometimes. So in today's video, we're breaking down how I spent my 105K salary to become financially free in under a decade while living in some of the most expensive places in the US. We'll cover how I made my earnings and then dive into how I spent them, from my essentials to my wants, all the way through to my investments, along with the strategy that I use to structure my spending for the biggest impact. So let's get right into it. Starting out with some important details about my life at the time. I was working as a consulting manager at a tech company, and I'd been there for about 3 years after graduating from college. My 105K salary translated to roughly $6,073 per month in take-home pay. So this amount is after taxes, but before taking out other deductions like health insurance or 401k investments. So this total amount was everything that I had available to use each month. I was living and working in the California Bay Area, where the taxes, cost of living are also relatively high, and this was during the years 2019 and pretty early 2020. So jumping straight into the essentials. So these are all of the expenses that were my necessities for everyday living, like housing, transportation, and groceries. By far, like most people, my largest expense was my rent, which was $1,350. So this included water, trash, and parking too. And even though this was my biggest cost, this was incredibly reasonable at the time, considering the location. So I rented a 2-bedroom, 1-bath apartment that I shared with a roommate, and I had the smaller of 2 rooms. So I paid a little bit under half of the total rent. I know inflation has been pretty wild since 2019 though, so I did a quick Zillow search just to see how this compares to rents today, and it looks like there's still quite a few similar rentals at this price point, so it's similar to what you might find in the Bay Area market today. My next largest expense was my car, which cost me about $300 a month. And while this may not seem like much, this was my biggest financial headache. And that's because the car was already fully paid off. So this $300 included $250 a month on average in repairs, plus $50 in gas because I lived in a pretty walkable area. So I'll do a full breakdown on this later, but when I bought the car in cash years earlier, I made the mistake of looking only at the initial sticker price, and I didn't even think about the ongoing maintenance costs for that brand of car, which was a huge oversight that cost me a lot of money and a lot of time for several years. My groceries came in at $175 per month. I worked long hours, so I usually ate at home, and I lived right across the street from a Trader Joe's, but I typically did most of my shopping in bulk at Costco, especially for staples that I ate every day. My utilities that weren't included in the rent, like internet and electricity, I split with my roommate, and my share of that typically came out to $90 per month. Finally, my health insurance premiums were $120, my car insurance was $95, and I also paid $25 for my portion of a family cell phone plan. In total, my essentials tallied in at $2,155 for just my basic necessities. Switching gears into my wants, these are the optional expenses that I chose to spend money on for enrichment, for fun, or just entertainment. And starting out with my subscriptions, I'm a longtime Netflix customer, and my subscription at the time cost me $10 a month. I also had HBO, which was another $10, so $20 per month total on subscriptions. I am someone who really enjoys eating out, and when I have the chance, I love to grab food from any one of our local neighborhood restaurants. So these usually aren't fancy spots, but more comfort food, hole-in-the-wall restaurants, and I'd go out to eat between 2 to 3 times per month, spending about $100. I also love the movies, so each month I'd go out to see a movie in the theaters, and between tickets, popcorn, and candy, this would cost me $25 per month. My largest expense in this category was clothing, and I had just started to practice a less but better approach to shopping, where I'd buy a few items each season that may be more expensive at first, but I knew could last in my closet for years and years. Many of the items that I bought back then are things that I still wear to this day. So here I spent about $335 a month. I also spent a decent amount on skincare and makeup, around $65 a month. And while the subscriptions were a fixed expense, how much I spent in some of the other wants categories could vary a bit from month to month. But when I knew that I was planning to spend more in one area, say I was going to see a more expensive live musical instead of a movie, I would adjust my spending in the other wants to balance it out at the end of the month. So my total spend on wants came out to $545 per month. And last but certainly not least, my savings and investments. So this is the money that I put away for my future self to enjoy it later on down the road. At the time, I had very far away savings goals without any clear deadline, like buying a home someday. So I was aiming to put away as much as I could so that I could eventually make that happen. I had already saved up my emergency fund. I prefer to have a good margin of safety when it comes to money, so for me, this came out to 6 months of living expenses already set aside, so I didn't need to make any additional contributions here. My work, though, provided a 401k, and the max you could contribute during this year was $19,000. And this came out to $1,583 per month. I contributed to the Roth plan, so this amount was after taxes, just like the rest of my expenses. And the remainder I tucked away in my individual brokerage account. So this came out to about $1,890 per month here. And that brings my total to $3,473 per month that I was putting away into savings and investments for the future. Taking a tally, during a typical month, I put about 35% of my take-home pay towards essentials, 10% towards wants, and then the remaining 55% towards investments. And these rates are something that I was only able to do by focusing on ways to save on my biggest expenses, like housing and transportation. And even though I saved the majority of my income and lived well below my means, I truly never felt like I was skimping out on life. I spent on the things that I cared about, I cut out what I didn't, and I never felt like I was missing out along the way. Of course, life happens, and if there were months where I needed to spend more, I could do so without feeling guilty or stressed out, knowing that I had built in a ton of wiggle room into my savings goals. And in hindsight, I'm so glad I saved so much early on, because many years later, it eventually led to financial freedom and the option to leave behind a job that wasn't working for me anymore. I'm curious if there was anything that surprised you about how I spent this income. Let me know in the comments. Always love to hear from you. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.